Limp what? Bizkit, who you say? Well, maybe you haven't heard the buzz yet, but don't worry. The sound of Limp Bizkit is coming your way. That is, unless it's already arrived. The Bizkit began in late 1994, when vocalist Fred Durst hooked up with longtime friend and bass player Sam Rivers, who in turn recommended bringing his jazz drumming cousin John Otto in to round off the rhythm section. Before long, guitarist Wes Barland and DJ Lethal, House of Pain, joined the fold, and Limp Bizkit was born. Fred Durst, rapper, musician, producer, A&R scout, record company vice president, video director, choreographer, filmmaker, graphic designer and global megastar, has also been known to make the coffee.
Oh, aye. Fred's made the coffee on occasions. The only problem is, you never know what he's used to stir it with.
Fred, the Bizkit's astounding, talented frontman, is perhaps one of modern music's most versatile and multi-layered characters. His own band is perched firmly atop the mainstream charts, a position that's somehow been achieved loudly by their own brand of metal, rap, hip-hop, hardcore. Despite this intimidating array of achievements, Fred Durst is still young. He was born on the 12th of April 1971 in the minuscule town of Gastonia in North Carolina. Stereotypically conservative, the small town mentally suffocated Fred from an early age, and his liberal and wide-ranging interests quickly marked him as an outsider. He spent much of his teenage years cooped up in his bedroom listening to old-school hip-hop, Sugar Hill Gang, Cold Crush Brothers, Eric B. and Rakim, punk, The Exploited, Blondie, ska, Madness, metal, Skid Row, and even a spattering of 80s rock. Like many kids in the 70s, Kiss posters and memorabilia also swamped his bedroom. He even got into Elvis through his mother's love of the King.
Well, man, Fred, he always knew he was too big a character to spend his life in Gastonia. I mean, he always said, all of the crew, every Saturday night, we'd go out, have a few beers, and he'd say, Matt, I'm getting the fuck out of here, this place. And he would always say, I'm gonna make it, I'm gonna fucking make it.
Later, he told MTV News, I wasn't some badass, I was a freak and everybody had to fuck with me. Admirably, his parents quickly and wholeheartedly supporting his creative edge. His father, a former narcotics officer, even built him a break-dancing room in the garage, whilst his mother, a Lutheran church employee, loved to sew uniforms for his teenage crew, the Dynamic Three. By the age of 14, he was writing his own rap songs. On graduation, Fred briefly joined the Navy, then got married and fathered a girl before getting divorced at the age of 20. Relocating to the swamplands of northeastern Florida, Fred set up home in 1992 in the racially diverse city of Jacksonville, which already had something of a reputation for rock music, Molly Hatchet, Lynyrd Skynyrd, and 38 Special. Here, he finally began to focus on his lifelong desire to form his own band, and while he fashioned his world vision, he tattooed thousands of arms, legs and bodies in the day at a local body art parlour.
I had a tattoo done by Fred Durst the Star. My old lady's name is on my arm. Now, I tell folks it was done by Fred Durst the Star. How about that? Pretty good, huh? I bet no one else has got Fred Durst doing their tattoo on their arm.
Sam suggested they get in touch with cousin, drummer and paintball fanatic John Otto, a Florida native some 6 years younger than Fred. John was in fact an accomplished jazz drummer and brought a deft degree of musicianship to the fledgling band. The Bizkit started gigging, debuting with a harsh mix of rap, metal and hardcore. At this stage, the local scene was fragmented, principally into two key segments. Super heavy metal, crammed with overdriven guitars or long-haired, fey, effects-laden indie noise bands. Neither group crossed over into each other's territory, apart from one band, namely Limp Bizkit. As Wes told Spinal Column magazine, we were like, nobody's doing any kind of crossover stuff. They're just sticking to what they want to play in those two different categories. When we came around, I guess we were kind of different than anything anyone had really ever seen there before. So different, in fact, that Limp Bizkit rapidly found themselves being mimicked, with many rival bands suddenly adopting hip-hop clothing and playing a rap-rock crossover music. This lack of originality was turned around by the band into their own song, Counterfeit, which was itself to be the subject of much later controversy. One of Limp Bizkit's favourite acts was the impressive Korn, who met Fred and went back to his place for a tattoo. They met every time Korn visited Jacksonville, till finally Fred gave them a demo tape of Limp Bizkit. Fred recalls of Korn's bassist's reaction that Fieldy loved it, and passed it over excitedly to the band's producer, Ross Robinson. The next thing you know, all his labels were calling, Fred later told the press. However, Limp took their time and toured first with Korn. During these dates, Fred allegedly was so broke he agreed to play one gig entirely naked if Korn handed over $500. The band as yet still had no record deal. However, the company who organised the tour, Flip Records, offered the band a contract on their return. At first, Limp Bizkit were tempted by the major label MCA, but backed out after several meetings, choosing instead to opt after all for the butting edge independent Flip Records, who were distributed by the all-powerful industry-leading Interscope. This latter label made a name for itself in the 90s with a string of colossal alternative bands, not least Nine Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson and the brilliantly acerbic Eminem. Limp Bizkit, however, not to be tempted by the easy route, decided to hit the road. Between now and the release of the debut album, the band toured their brutal live show relentlessly. Later, when Limp was sitting pretty on top of the Billboard charts, some accused them of not having paid their dues. However, as Interscope president Tom Whalley told Rolling Stone magazine, "It's not as if Limp were an overnight success. They toured forever." One interesting feature of Limp's ferocious live shows at this time was Fred's tendency to walk out and meet the crowd before or after each show. Having only recently been a fan in the audience himself, Fred was not about to lose sight of his roots, as he told MTV News. "If the bands I love came out and talked to me, came out and just talked for 2 seconds, it would have meant the world to me. I'm out there, talking to all these fans and these kids, and it totally touches them." This approach, mixed with their breathtaking live shows, meant that Limp Bizkit had quickly become one of the underground's most talked about bands, largely by word-of-mouth publicity. Although Fred loved the live gigs, he was sometimes nervous.
Were you guys a little bit nervous about opening up with a hot dog flavored water?
Well, we put the truck behind us at a height so all the lights blind everyone the whole time. So they can't see. So they're just like, why the hell is the truck there? Why are the lights in our eyes? Oh, they're playing Drake stuff. No good. That's what they do.
I was just trying not to mess up.
Yeah.
That's a big concern. If we mess that up, then we really suck.
When Fred was told the audience thought the show they'd just seen was A+, Fred didn't agree.
I thought that we let them down a little bit because we didn't light ourselves properly so they could see us good and see the show good. I give it a B, a solid B. We're very critical upon ourselves, more critical than the average person, and most artists are that way. We're never good enough.
One of the band's most memorable series of dates in the early years was in Scotland. In the States, Limp were used to fairly rough crowds, especially as their music, dubbed by many as rapcore, was gathering a sizable following. However, the band was still taken aback by the physicality of the Scottish crowd. Fires were regularly started at the back of halls. The band say people with mental spike implants in their skulls, and young girls with branded tattoos, and the moshes were unbelievable. Fred later told Spinal Column magazine that you can take the biggest, nastiest, gnarliest person in the States, like a big huge punk 300-pound motherfucker, and he would just be dwarfed by the intensity of the guys over there. The roadie who was drafted in to set up the band's equipment remembers them well.
The Scots loved the Limp. They were ace, the Billy Bollocks. The crowd were well tanked up on beer and lager. It was brilliant, ace. You know what I mean? Somebody in the crowd shouted, "Hey Fred, you're a right nutter, you're a headbanger, are you part Scotsman?" The crowd went mental.
Early in 1996, Limp played a slot on the Warped Tour, which was followed by dates with House of Pain. Shortly after this, the band gave their 5th and final member when House of Pain split up. The Californian turntables, DJ Lethal, joined Limp's ranks. His first taste of the band was on those final few House of Pain dates, and he was particularly impressed by a cover of Paula Abdul's Straight Up, which Limp performed. I was like, what the fuck? Recognising the band's talent, and in particular Fred's star quality, DJ Lethal was excited to join. He brought a rich lashing of hip-hop influence to the band's sound. DJ Lethal's father was a guitarist who loved Stevie Wonder as well as rock. Lethal, 2 years older than Fred, was brought up on a staple diet of old-school hip-hop mixed with classic rock. At the age of 17, he was in House of Pain. At 18, he was selling 1 million records. He was perfect for Limp Bizkit. Lethal himself was slightly more modest, telling them all a sound website. I bring a bunch of crap to the table. I try and bring new sounds, not just the regular chirping, scratching sounds. I'm trying to be like another guitar player. That's my main goal. Everything was not smooth sailing for the band. There was a problem with the record label. The band discussed this with their management.
I've talked with him on a few occasions. I mean, I guess his feelings were a little bit hurt at first, but like I said, we make mistakes, and we learn by the mistakes we make. And I have a feeling that after speaking with him and with the head of his record company personally, I feel that the bigger part of the mistake was made by someone in his camp. And they took the liberty to try to make some decisions that they thought that the band would like, and instead it stepped on a few people's toes. As much as I'm friends with those guys and with a lot of other bands, if something comes in the way of myself and the three other guys in my band, I stand by them, and I got their back 100%. So. We worked it out, and everything's cool. We tongue kissed and made up, and everything's great.
Limp knew it was time to start recording their debut album. It was entitled $3 Bill Y'all, and it was an enjoyable experience for the band.
It was a glide. All these great ideas being pulled out of the band by Ross Robinson, the producer. Fred said it was ideas we didn't even know we had in us. He said Robinson was a vacuum cleaner for emotions.
Scott Welland had a viewpoint on Fred's writing.
I've, written a couple songs with Fred and the band for the album, and have, worked as assistant producer to help arrange some stuff and, come up with some ideas that were, maybe a little bit more challenging for Fred, because I know that he really wants to sort of push the envelope as far as as a songwriter, and I'm just kind of there to help facilitate that.
$3 Bill Y'all was a very direct notice of intent from the band. The record was a perfect blend of underground savvy, open emotions, acutely powerful noise-mongering, infectious grooves, and savage hooks. Promo single Counterfeit, as mentioned before, attacked the fakers who adopt any scene for fashion's sake, whilst Pollution berated those who ignorantly dismissed the more noisy end of music's spectrum. The jazz-laden Stuck showed the band's musical diversity, while the memorable grooves of Stalemate was about as pop as Limp Bizkit got. Broken relationships, betrayed emotions, superficial people, and arrogant critics were all washed with a Limp Bizkit lyrical brush. Of course, no new band is ever without its critics. Some of them are not that impressed.
They might not have many original ideas, and they are largely an outgrowth of Korn, Faith No More, and the Chili Peppers. I will add, though, here at the magazine we're not looking for perfection on a debut. What we're looking for is a promising sound, and on that front, Limp Bizkit do deliver.
On its release, $3 Bill Y'all was only modestly successful, receiving cautiously warm reviews. At the time, the American charts were starting to feel the first tremors of the oncoming pop onslaught that would later see the likes of Britney Spears, Brandy, and the all-conquering Backstreet Boys dominate the charts. Limp Bizkit, now officially crowned as the leaders of the emerging rapcore scene, were therefore fighting against fashion. However, the impressive fact about this debut album is that, when they released its follow-up Significant Other in the summer of 1999, $3 Bill Y'all had spent 67 weeks on the chart and was still selling at the rate of 25,000 copies a week, eventually passing the 1.6 million mark. At this stage, however, the press, radio and mainstream media were largely ignorant of the growing phenomenon of Limp Bizkit. The band were undaunted and launched into what can only be described as a gig frenzy in the aftermath of their debut album release. Between the summer and Christmas of 1997, Warped Tour ran through the early autumn, which was followed by support dates with Primus in November, more dates with the Deftones in December, before launching into 1998 with their own headline tour. Elsewhere, they appeared on MTV's Spring Break edition of Fashionably Loud. On the road with them was their outrageous live set, including a giant toilet out of which the band appeared, sci-fi gadgetry, and scores of breakdancers. With each show played, hundreds more were converted to the cause. The promoters, to a man, agreed they'd book the Limp any time.
The Limp, value for money. They don't cut corners or try to cheat their audience. Every gig I've seen, they perform like it was the last time they were going to play.
The early 1998 shows were their own headline slot, supported by Sevendust and Clutch. An inventive piece of marketing saw these dates called Ladies' Night in Cambodia, where the first 200 ladies to turn up at each show were given free admission. The shows ran from early February to mid-May and increased Limp's profile enormously. Limp were also invited onto the bill for the inaugural Family Values Tour. The inspiration of, and headlined by Korn, this metal-edge gig stole the thunder from the more traditional and established festivals such as Lollapalooza and Horde. As Korn manager Jeff Quantinez told ABC News, "It was the festivals that lost sight of what they were doing that suffered last year. We don't want kids going home and saying, yeah, it was good. We want them going home and calling 10 of their friends and saying, it was incredible, I saw God." These dates kicked off mid-summer and included in the lineup acts such as Ice Cube, Rammstein and, of course, Limp Bizkit. One of the officials asked Fred if he'd like to say anything before he went out onto the stage.
Anything you want to say to get off your chest before you go out there?
Just know that we care and we're grateful for everything we got. And Limp Bizkit time.
The show rambled through the summer, ending on Halloween night at the Patriot Centre in Fairfax, Virginia. Rammstein were removed from the stage for being underdressed, according to the venue's general manager. The singer was wearing a large black phallus, the keyboard player wore only diapers, and the rest of the band only had duct tape over their genitals. The plug was pulled after 10 minutes. Prior to this, Limp Bizkit, on third after Orgy and Incubus, performed in various Elvis costumes, faking temper tantrums and behaving like the king throughout. Despite this frivolity, Limp blew their fellow performers off stage. The buzz around the band moved up several notches more. By the time the debut Family Values Tour ground to a halt in Virginia, it had grossed more than $6.4 million over only 27 dates, and went on to spawn a gold album and platinum video. Organisers knew they'd hit on a strong formula, so when suggestions were put forward for the next year's bill, the awesome Limp Bizkit were high on the list. Nobody knew then, but by the time that series of dates came round, just 12 months later, Limp Bizkit would be one of the biggest bands in the world. The band released a cover version of George Michael's Faith, and although orally violent and somewhat a polar opposite of the original version, the single rapidly caught the attention of radio stations across America. The band's record company were delighted.
The single, that did really well, but the video, that was a killer.
Despite their difference in styles, Fred announced he was a fan of George Michael, telling MTV that everything he wrote was a hit and huge. "I thought he was awesome, he was the Mac, it was just a fun song." The single gave them their biggest chart success to date and highlighted the array of bizarre cover versions the band regularly played live. They have periodically performed Prince's 1999, Ministry's Thieves and Liars, House of Pain's Jump Around, and Jane's Addiction, Wood for You. Fred also said he hoped to record a version of George's father figure at some point in the future. When asked how they write the songs, Scott replied,
"What we did was we just kind of sat down. I pulled out a piece of paper and a pen, and we wrote out the obvious ones. We were, left with like 12 songs that were obvious songs to put on there, and then 4 more that we, intend to record. So I think we're talking about like a 16 or 17 song album."
The close of 1998 saw Limp working hard on their second album. When the Family Values Tour had finished, they started work immediately, enjoying the non-stop roller coaster of finally leaving the tour bus behind, but instead driving straight to the Los Angeles studio. Waiting there for them was producer Terry Date, as well as guest performers such as Wu-Tang rapper Method Man, Dr. Dre protege Eminem, Korn's Jonathan Davis, plus extra production from Gang Starr's DJ Premier and Stone Temple Pilots' Scott Weiland. Fred was keen to release new material since the hardcore fans had been listening to the songs from $3 Bill Y'all for a long time before Faith made that crossover chart breakthrough. Fred felt particularly in awe of Weiland, the controversial Pilots frontman who'd been in the headlines in recent years for his battles with drugs. Indeed, Weiland was even reputed to be giving Fred vocal lessons. The album was co-produced by Date and the band, with additional production duties by Weiland, and Limp found the entire process extremely creative, as he told moderator of Twet.com during an online chat with fans. "It's either a long or short process. We have no real method. A special thing that happens because of the chemistry of our band. I don't know how it happens, it just does." When asked where the place in rock was,
We know what our place is in rock and roll. You know, I don't know if there's any other group in the last decade that's had as many massive radio hits as we have. I mean, I think we've got like around 13 songs that have been, top 5 songs at radio, and I think it's a testament to the strength of the individuals in this band and the people that I perform with, Robert and Dean and Eric.
The opening, just like this, is a bruising assault of guitars and rap vocals interspersed with clean melodies and infectious grooves. There are even backing vocal harmonies, but this does not offer any let-up in the oral barrage. It gives every track an intensity that MTV 120 Minutes host Matt Pinfield champions in a hidden track rant at the end of the disc, pleading bands worldwide that we need something with substance, depth and soul. Next up was Future's smash single Nookie, with its compelling bass line, unrushed rhythms, vocally anthemic chants and stop-start dynamics, making it one of the finest single releases of 1999. Written by Durst about staying with a bad girlfriend just for the nookie, it was just one of many tracks on this record that saw the frontman lyrically open up his recent emotional turmoils. Notably, the record was almost completely apolitical. He broke up with a long-term girlfriend during the making of the album. This gave the album an unexpected vulnerability, but also showed Limp are not just head-down noise. The second album was called Significant Other. When asked exactly what that meant,
Significant Other. It's like such a title. You know what I mean? It just, there's no limits to what it means.
Calling the second album Significant Other was no decision taken lightly, as Fred told MTV News.
Anything it was before, record, band, attitudes, feelings, it's the significant other. This is the new level. This is whether it's a lower level or a higher level, we'll let our fans determine that.
Significant Other was clearly a far more ambitious and multi-dimensional record than its predecessor. As for what the band thought of that progression, Sam simply said, "Our first one is like a demo compared to the new one. It makes me never want to play the old songs again." Preceding the album was the first single of the campaign, namely the aforementioned Nookie. Possibly the first rapcore classic, the video for the single was a brilliant piece of Limp Bizkit marketing. They developed a reputation for surprise gigs, more of which later. In this case, decided to film a public performance of the track. 1,000 fans were invited via a special phone line to Long Island City outside New York on a cold April Sunday to participate. The shoot lasted 4 hours, with the band situated in an alley and surrounded by female dancers whose costumes aped Fred's clothes, khaki dickies, shell-toe Adidas sneakers and his now trademark backwards red baseball cap. The girls were christened the Limp Bizkits, and Fred had 30 New York Yankees caps. For his part, the multi-talented Fred directed the clip and even helped choreograph the dance moves. When Fred was questioned about the amount of input he was given to the band's success, he replied,
It's like a dream come true because everything's just falling into place. God's definitely taking care of me right now.
Chart potential for the single looked good when it instantly became the most requested track on modern radio stations, and MTV placed the promo on immediate heavy rotation. This optimism was confirmed when the Nookie crashed into the Billboard charts at number 3, increasing the already rabid expectation for the forthcoming second album. When the charts were announced, Limp Bizkit had pulled it off. Significant Other shifted a huge 634,000 copies, bumping the Backstreets down to number 2, who only sold half that many. The scale of Limp's achievement is reflected by the fact that the ever-popular Missy Elliott only managed to reach number 10 that week with her album, Da Real World. These figures made Significant Other the 15th highest debut in the history of SoundScan, the system used to collate chart positions. Amazingly, Limp held on to the top spot till the final week of July, when Backstreet's historical album sales returned them to the top position. It was a big week for Fred. While his album was flying off the shelves, he was also appointed Senior Vice President of Interscope Records. His responsibilities at the label would include A&R, marketing, production, mixing and remixing plus video direction. He also negotiated his own imprint to be released through the label. Fred had supposedly been approached by several labels for a similar position. Fred's name was on everyone's lips in the music industry. His services were being sought from new artists to record company presidents. The gravity and scale of Limp's success, added to Fred's subsequent crowning in the media as the most powerful man in alternative rock, meant there was a growing evidence of a genuine resurgence of far heavier music that had recently been popular. While some critics saw the pop success of Britney Spears et al. As final proof that rock was dead, the success of Limp, and indeed many of the bands on the Family Values tour, showed that heavy music was in fact the new form. The often conservative Entertainment Weekly hailed the move as the dawn of the decade, while a previously negative Rolling Stone credited these bands with having redefined late 90s hard rock. There were rumours that retailers had also been taken by surprise by the size of demands for Limp's album. Scott Weiland certainly felt there was revolution of hard rock happening, as he told MTV News. There started to be some excitement within rock and roll again. You know, I think rock and roll and alternative music has gotten fairly stale and kind of boring in the last couple of years, since the earlier part of the 90s, and there's some good things happening again, sort of like a breath of fresh air. Fred was keen to avoid labels, saying instead, "We're a rough life street, hip-hop orientated band that mixes in heavy emotional music." And Limp's own brand of heavy music was brought even further into the public's consciousness when they performed at the 1999 Woodstock at Griffiths Park in Rome, New York State. The event had been intended as a 30th anniversary celebration of the original Festival of Love and Peace, and the bill was crammed with seriously heavyweight acts, including Metallica, Rage Against the Machine, Alanis Morissette, Kid Rock, Ice Cube and Offspring. The enormous 3,600-acre site was so vast it straddled 2 zip codes. 225,000 fans squeezed into the site and were mostly good-humoured. However, as the day progressed, there were reports of various muggings and isolated sexual assaults, exacerbated by the general air of nudity and excess. By the time Limp Bizkit walked on stage, the air was ripe with tension. Initially things went well, but as the band ripped into break stuff, fights in the mash pit broke out, and later a woman claimed she'd been raped. The crowd then ripped off the plywood surrounding the television camera tower, skimming the huge wooden sheets across the tops of people's worried heads. Some men tried to crowd surf with the wood, and injuries soon started to mount up. Fred was, for his part, said, "There are no rules," which some observers instantly claimed was incitement to riot. And later on, the Red Hot Chili Peppers bore the brunt of much of the violence, with a surreal sight of hundreds of out-of-control fires raging during their encore rendition of Jimi Hendrix's Fire. In the immediate aftermath, there were 2 distinct repercussions of this rowdy Woodstock performance. Firstly, Limp was slated by many for their allegedly inflammatory comments, but secondly, Significant Other shot back to #1 again, shifting an additional 250,000 copies and replacing Backstreet Boys once again. At the time, Limp went into a press silence. The band felt unfairly targeted, so instead decided to answer the harsh words in the video for their next single. September 1999's Rearranged, Fred called this promo his press release after Woodstock. The clip shows the band being tried by a jury viewing footage of Woodstock before being drowned execution style in milk. And some months later, Fred told Q magazine that all we did was play a Limp Bizkit show. Crazy crowds, man. Of course, while all this madness had been happening, the band continued to do the one thing they knew best, touring. The sales of Significant Other had brought sellout shows at football stadiums, videos on rotation at MTV, screaming girls, sports cars, large houses, and all the trappings of the successful rock star. They had the best-selling rock album in the USA, with sales of over 5 million. They were the band, and their management were top of the world. At another gig, this time on the Limtropolis dates, bassist Sam Rivers smashed his bass guitar and inadvertently cut his hand open. The bloody wound was sufficiently deep to require him to be rushed to hospital, where he received 10 stitches and an x-ray before being whisked back to the venue to continue playing. Another show in Orlando had to be cancelled after Fred severely sprained his ankle the previous night in Jacksonville. Rather more seriously, at one July show, Fred was arrested in St. Paul, Minnesota, after allegedly kicking a low security guard during the band set at Roy Wilkins Auditorium. The police stated he'd been arrested for aggravated assault. The show was not stopped, and Fred was later formally charged with simple assault, which carries a maximum sentence of 90 days in jail and/or a $700 fine. Fred denied the allegations and told police the incident was a simple case of mistaken identity and that Durst thought the guard was a fan attacking his own personal bodyguard. Fred announced he would plead not guilty. The St. Paul Pioneer Planet reported that Fred would fight the charges and would demand a jury trial. His defence attorney, Earl Grey, said, "We're just going to do the court and go and fight those charges." He was protecting his personal friend and bodyguard at the time of the incident. Limp Bizkit's summer dates also saw 2 women stripped down to their thong underwear on stage. They were later charged with indecent exposure in late July. At the end of this period, Fred felt it was time for a change and decided to move to LA. His road manager was surprised at this turn of events.
Aye, well, we were all surprised by the LA thing. I mean, but I suppose Fred felt it was time for a change, you know what I mean? A new challenge or whatever, but off he went.
Fred moved into a large apartment with a spectacular view of the city, shared only with his English bulldog puppy, Biscuit. He started moving in high-profile show business circles and was seen out in the town and at trendy eateries with the likes of Jim Carrey, Carmen Electra, Tommy Lee, actor Jared Leto, and Goldie Hawn's actress daughter, Kate Hudson. Only a year previously, he had, probably jokingly, told a reporter from Spin that I'm never going to move to New York or LA. I'm going to stay in redneck-ass Jacksonville and hang out with my redneck friends and my redneck cookouts. Still, why not to LA? Fred acknowledged that some of his older friends disliked this move, but he was keen to sample different lifestyles other than Jacksonville, Florida. He told one writer, I can be at dinner and happen to run into a director or a producer. That could lead to another album of a movie, or someone wanted me to do a sponsorship deal with Calvin Klein. This house move is all part of what Fred calls his crazy vision. He has accumulated in '99 alone a massive list of side projects. He's worked on a plethora of tracks with other artists, including plans to cover Jane Addiction's Jane Says with a member of Filter, as well as a track with Kid Rock. Limp Bizkit also had tracks featured on the End of Days soundtrack and on the Snot tribute album, Straight Up. They also recorded a track with Run DMC for the new album Crowd Royale. DJ Lethal also kept busy with scores of remixes during this period, while Fred produced several bands, including Primus. The main side project for Fred, however, was directing the teen thrillers Nature's Cure, a major movie funded by Warner Brothers, for which he received a six-figure sum. Written by Chris Kletzstein and based on an idea by Fred, the film is said to be a mix between the band's long-form video home movie entitled Poop is also directed by Fred and released in the autumn of 1999. Not satisfied with that, Fred also continued his stage set design work and lined up a post-Family Values tour for the winter of 1999 with Method Man and Redman. Meantime, the Limp Bizkit roller coaster continues to thunder. They've been successfully nominated for MTV's Best Group Video and Best Rock Video for Nookie. Also, the band will release And Together Now as a third single from the multi-million selling Significant Other, and in this video it is explained where Fred went at the end of Rearranged Clip, and also features vocalist Method Man. The band are expected to begin work on their third album in early 2000. Sales for that record threaten to be even bigger. Reflecting on their enormous success in the last 2 years, Fred's infamous burning ambition is no more sated than when he first started the band. We couldn't have done this without the fans who love music and love real music for real life, he told one reporter. We're so grateful we've touched so many people, but y'all ain't seen nothing yet.